This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the founder of Russia's Wagner mercenary force, said in a video published on Friday the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut was practically surrounded by his forces and that Kyiv's forces had only one road out.
Я обращаюсь к президенту Украины Владимиру Александровичу Зеленскому.
Prigozhin's men have spearheaded the assault in eastern Ukraine for months. Moscow regards Bakhmut as a useful stepping stone to seize bigger cities like Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. Ukrainian authorities are still unearthing people who were hastily buried in makeshift graves during Russia's brief but brutal occupation of towns near Kyiv. AP correspondent Charles de Ledesma reports.
Almost 200 bodies remain unidentified, while 280 people are listed as missing. Alexander Pinchuk's mother, Helena, is among them. They never found her body in the wreckage of her apartment building, which took a direct hit from an airstrike a year ago. Pinchuk had walked out of the building just 8 hours earlier and has not seen his mother since. On Thursday, he stood in the winter chill, grim-faced, among a group of mourners who've gathered for a religious service to commemorate the anniversary of the strike. I'm Charles de Ledesma.
A Belarusian court has sentenced Alice Bialyatsky, Belarus's top human rights advocate and one of the winners of the 2022 Nobel Peace Prize, to 10 years in prison. Bialyatsky and 3 other top figures of a human rights center he founded were convicted of financing anti-government protests. They were arrested and jailed after massive protests over a 2020 election that gave authoritarian President Alexander Lukashenko a new term in office. Find more at voanews.com. This is VOA News. A large fire has broken out at a fuel storage depot in Indonesia's capital, killing at least 17 people, injuring dozens of others, and forcing the evacuation of thousands of nearby residents after spreading to their neighborhood. Fire officials say at least 180 firefighters and 37 fire engines are struggling to contain the blaze in a nearby neighborhood. Video of the fire broadcast on television showed hundreds of residents running in panic while thick plumes of black smoke and orange flames filled the sky and firefighters battled the blaze. An explosion on a southern Nigerian oil pipeline owned by Shell killed at least 12 people on Friday, authorities at the scene said, while people in the area said they feared many more had died in the blast. Nigeria's Electoral Commission has declared Bolo Tinubu as the winner of last Saturday's presidential election, but the 2 major opposition parties have vowed to challenge the results in court. Timothy Obuzu has the latest from Abuja.
Winning 37% or nearly 9 million of the total votes, Bola Tinubu emerged victorious in the hotly contested presidential contest. He takes over from Muhammadu Buhari, who's stepping down after the constitutional limit of 2 terms, marked by widespread insecurity and economic problems. Tinubu's victory is being challenged by the opposition, People's Democratic Party and Labour Party. They allege the weekend election was rigged, with many Nigerians denied the chance to vote. Timothy Obuzu for VOA News, Abuja, Nigeria.
LGBT Ugandans are facing more backlash in an already hostile country after Uganda's parliament launched an investigation into the alleged promotion of homosexuality in schools. Reuters correspondent David Doyle has more.
Activists say lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender Ugandans have been hit by a wave of discrimination and violence since Parliament announced its investigation. Their status is already precarious in Uganda, where same-sex relations are punishable by up to life in prison. Activists say the vitriolic language being used by officials, as well as recent anti-gay comments by President Yoweri Museveni and the head of Uganda's Anglican Church, has already had far-reaching consequences.
Alec Murdaugh, the disgraced lawyer and member of a powerful family in the southern U.S. state of South Carolina, was sentenced to life on Friday for killing his wife and son in what prosecutors said was an attempt to hide his drug addiction and theft of millions of dollars. Follow us on the VOA mobile app. I'm Joe Ramsey. This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. European Parliament President Roberta Metsola on Saturday said those responsible for war crimes committed in Ukraine need to pay.
It is no longer a matter of how, it is a matter of when. And even now that we see already the cases that are being prosecuted in Ukraine, the information that is being gathered by different member states, by the United States, by the United Kingdom, it is about bringing persons accountable, including Vladimir Putin, to justice. Without that, we will not have peace.
The president of the European Parliament visited the western Ukrainian city of Lviv on Saturday as a three-day war crimes conference was being held there. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency said on Saturday talks were ongoing with Iran on two sets of important matters, including the science sector, and there was great expectation about the process.
There is a great expectation about our joint work in order to move forward in the issues that Iran and the agency are working on to clarify and to bring credible assurances about the nuclear program in Iran.
Rafael Grossi began meetings in Tehran on Friday that diplomats said were meant to push Iran to cooperate with an IAEA investigation into uranium traces found at undeclared sites that had been enriched close to nuclear weapons grade. Residents searched through the remains of their charred homes Saturday as an Indonesian state energy firm apologized for a fire at a Jakarta fuel storage depot it said killed at least 18 people, including 2 children. Dozens were also injured, and police said 3 people were still missing after Friday night's blaze at a depot in North Jakarta. Follow us on the VOA mobile app. This is VOA News. The station master involved in Greece's worst ever train disaster had his court appearance postponed by a day on Saturday as the country braced for more mass protest over the crash that killed at least 57 people. Thousands of protesters have demonstrated across the nation since Tuesday's collision between a passenger train and a freight train, with public anger mounting over government failure to manage the rail network. The first burials of victims of the crash began Saturday. Public refuges known as the warm hubs are spreading across Britain this winter as soaring food and energy prices take their toll on citizens. AP correspondent Karen Chalmers reports.
Thousands of warm hubs have appeared throughout the UK in libraries, churches and community centres. They act as a haven for those who cannot afford to continuously heat their homes or are trying to save money by skipping hot meals. The disastrous combination of Russia's war in Ukraine, continuing disruption from the pandemic and the economic aftershocks of Brexit is putting more people in Britain under financial strain. The UK's annual inflation rate was just above 10% in January, with food prices up almost 17% over the year. Karen Chabas, London.
Several U.S. states are considering dropping out of a nationwide registration program that helps track registered voters after conspiracy theories arose about the partisan system. AP correspondent Jackie Quinn reports.
Right now, there are 32 states and the District of Columbia enrolled in the Electronic Registration Information Center to identify voters who have moved to other states and those who've died. Louisiana dropped out after online posts from election conspiracy theorists questioned the purpose of the group and its source of funding. But leaders in Georgia, another Republican-led state, are actually crediting the program with providing data to remove some 100,000 people no longer eligible to vote. I'm Quinn.
Kenya was hit by a nationwide power blackout on Saturday evening caused by a quote-unquote system disturbance. Electricity distributor Kenya Power said, quote, "We are working to restore normalcy within the shortest time possible," Kenya Power said in a statement. Kenya Power is the country's sole electricity distributor, and the bulk of its power comes from Kenya Electricity Generating Company, which is the main producer. Find more on our website, voanews.com. You can also find the podcasts Flashpoint Ukraine and Flashpoint Iran at voanews.com, or follow us on the VOA mobile app. I'm Joe Ramsey, VOA News. This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. Russian forces are continuing their push for the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut, a prime target for Moscow in eastern Ukraine. AP correspondent Sarah Nafa reports.
Ukrainian units destroyed 2 key bridges just outside Bakhmut, including one linking it to the nearby town of Chasiv Yar, along the last remaining Ukrainian resupply route, according to UK military intelligence officials and other Western analysts. The Institute for the Study of War, a Washington-based think tank, assessed that Kiev's actions may point to a looming pullout from parts of the city. It said Ukrainian troops may conduct a limited and controlled withdrawal from particularly difficult sections of eastern Bakhmut, while seeking to inhibit Russian movement there and limit exit routes to the west. I'm Sarah Nafa.
Pope Francis on Sunday called for authorities to stop human traffickers operating in the Mediterranean as he expressed his sorrow for last week's migrant boat disaster in which dozens of people were killed in southern Italy.
Manifesto il mio apprezzamento e la mia gratitudine alla popolazione locale.
He said, I renew my appeal to prevent such tragedies from happening again. May traffickers of human beings be stopped, the Pope said in his weekly address to crowds in St. Peter's Square. Local authorities say 70 bodies had so far been recovered from the boat. The migrants had departed from Turkey and were from countries including Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, Somalia, and Syria. A station master accused of causing Greece's deadliest train disaster has been charged with negligent homicide and jailed pending trial. An examining magistrate and a prosecutor agreed Sunday multiple counts of homicide as well as charges of causing bodily harm and endangering transportation safety should be brought against the railway employee. At least 57 people were killed late Tuesday. This is VOA News. The nearly 8-year-old U.S. deployment to Syria to combat Islamic State is still worth the risk, the top U.S. military officer said on Saturday after a rare, unannounced visit to a dusty base in the country's northeast to meet U.S. troops. Reuters correspondent Zachary Goldman reports.
Army General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, arrived in the dusty, embattled region where the U.S. has a force of about 900 service members deployed to monitor and counter remaining Islamic State militants. This little-known American mission in Syria is meant to keep a lid on any potential resurgence of ISIS as the U.S. tries to grapple with threats from Russia and China. U.S. troops have operated in Syria without permission from Damascus since 2015. It is today a remnant of the global war against terrorism that saw massive U.S. invasions and occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan. While those two operations have since ended, top American commanders appear committed to maintaining a small cadre of forces in Syria for now.
Reuters correspondent Zachary Goldman. Dozens of Israeli Air Force reservists on Sunday said they would not turn up for a training day in protest against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's judicial reforms, a jolt for the country whose diverse military is meant to be apolitical. In a letter circulated on social media, 37 pilots and navigators from an F-15 squadron said they would skip drills scheduled for Wednesday and instead, quote, devote our time to dialogue and reflection for the sake of democracy and national unity. The religious national government seeks changes that includes curbs on the Supreme Court, which it accuses of overreach. Negotiators from more than 100 countries completed a UN treaty late on Saturday aimed at protecting the high seas, a long-awaited step environmental groups say will help reverse marine biodiversity loss. Reuters correspondent David Doyle reports.
The legally binding pact to conserve and ensure the sustainable use of ocean biodiversity has been under discussion for 15 years.
Good evening-ish.
This is UN Conference President Rina Lee at the end of a marathon day of talks.
The ship has reached the shore.
The treaty is seen as a crucial component in global efforts to bring 30% of the world's land and sea under protection by the end of the decade. Very little of the high seas, which are outside national jurisdictions, are subject to any protection.
Reuters correspondent David Doyle. Peruvian President Dino Boluarte will be questioned this week by prosecutors investigating the deaths of anti-government protesters, one of her lawyers said on Sunday. Peru hasn't been embroiled in a political crisis since her predecessor Pedro Castillo was ousted and arrested on December 7th.
This is VOA News via remote. This is VOA News, and I'm Diane Roberts. Ukraine's presidential office says at least 6 civilians have been killed and 5 others wounded by the latest Russian shelling. In the Donetsk region, the Russian shelling struck Bakhmut, Kramatorsk, Chasiv Yar, and other towns and villages. Donetsk Governor Pavlov Kryalenko says civilians are fleeing the region to escape Russian shelling, continuing round the clock as additional troops and weapons are being deployed there. The regional governor in neighboring Luhansk adds Russians have been targeting villages in the region with heavy artillery. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is in Jordan at the start of a 3-country Mideast visit. He aims to reassure key allies of America's commitment to the region, despite Washington's recent focus on Russia and China. At a news conference, Secretary Austin called out Iran's military support for Russia in Ukraine, saying it is particularly troubling Iran has gotten more proficient with drones in the course of the Ukraine conflict.
What Iran is doing is really unthinkable, and certainly it's in terms of the region, for the future of the region, it's a really bad thing, and they're getting more experience as they employ these UAVs in Ukraine, and that doesn't bode well for the region here.
A crisis over suspected poisonings targeting Iranian schoolgirls is escalating as authorities now acknowledge more than 50 schools have been struck in a wave of possible cases. It remains unclear who or what is responsible since the alleged poisonings began in November, and Iran's supreme leader has spoken out about it. The supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei called the crimes unforgivable. This is VOA News. Israeli President Yitzhak Herzog said on Monday a compromise in the government's judicial overhaul plan could be imminent, sending financial markets sharply higher, even though there was no immediate sign of a deal between the government and opposition. Anti-reform protests continue to spread, with local media circulating a letter by 10 former Air Force chiefs to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warning of the grave and tangible threat posed by the judicial overhaul plan, a day after reservists said they would not turn up for training in protest. Unions are threatening to shut down France's economy in what they hope is their toughest riposte yet to President Emmanuel Macron's plan to raise the retirement age. The AP's Charles de Ledesma reports.
The first actions have involved truckers sporadically blocking major highway arteries and interchanges in go-slow actions dubbed escargot operations across several French regions. Then unions plan an open-ended strike on the National Rail Service starting later Monday. The government's bracing for the biggest disruptions on Tuesday, when unions plan protests across multiple sectors. The retirement reform would raise the official pension age from 62 to 64. The bill's under debate in Parliament. I'm Charles de Ledesma.
A military court in Cameroon over the weekend charged a media mogul, a military officer, and a police commissioner with complicity in the January torture and killing of journalist Martinez Zogo. VOA's Moki Edwin Kinzeka has more.
Cameroon media reported Saturday that business tycoon and media mogul Jean-Pierre Amugu Belinga, Lieutenant Colonel Justin Danwe, and Police Commissioner Maxime Eko are being held in a maximum security prison in pre-trial detention along with several policemen and civilians. A Yaoundé military tribunal charged the 3 men Saturday with complicity in the torture that led to the death of journalist Martinez Zogo in January. Zogo's mutilated remains were found 5 days after his abduction. Journalists in Cameroon say they feel like they are under attack. Just 2 weeks after Zogo's killing, the body of another journalist, Jean-Jacques Olabebe, was found in the capital. Moki Edwin Kinzeka for VOA News, Yaoundé, Cameroon.
South Korea says it will raise local civilian funds to compensate Koreans who won damages in lawsuits against Japanese companies that enslaved them during World War II.